for committing these sorts of crimes, and was let go because the victim did not want to testify. So now he's back in jail and awaiting a new trial, while new evidence is coming forward about the things that he's done. The other very similar sort of expose was a two-part one on Michael Jackson, and in particular two young men who, beginning at the age of 7, were, according to their testimony, were sexually molested by Michael Jackson for a period of about 7 years, beginning at age 7 and going through age 14. And I won't go into the details of that, but you can see the documentary. That documentary is on HBO. If you have that, you can find it. There's a 2-part documentary. There's also a follow-up that was done with the two men now. They're grown men now, in the documentary that are talking about their experiences with Mr. Jackson, and also the director. And Oprah brings in a group of men who are survivors of child abuse, child sexual abuse. So you can see those documentaries and hear that discussion. It was all very powerful and I think important to talk about. But what I want to talk about is, where do you go? Where do you go? For the victims, this is something that they must struggle with, and will, as one of the men in the Michael Jackson documentary said, something that he will be working on the rest of his life. All of them will. All of the victims of these horrible situations. And these victims have a lot in common. These victims loved, and in many ways still do, love the person who did these things to them. They were with these people out of love. And they endured the abuse that they received because of love. However, the abuse has all kinds of effects. There's anger, there's frustration, there's guilt. A sense of guilt because they feel that they caused this to happen, or they didn't leave when they should have left, or all kinds of things. Lots of self-doubt, lots of self-hatred, all of these things. And of course there's anger at the abuser. There's disgust and hatred toward the abuser that eventually comes. But for a time, most of these people have all of that stuff buried. They put it aside. It goes away somewhere because they just can't deal with it. So my question, my thought, and what I think the attention that we are giving to this situation is, the question that we're asking ultimately is, what do you do with this? How do you ultimately forgive the monster? Forgive the monster that did horrible things to you, or that did horrible things to people you care about, or even when you're talking about public personas, people you thought were one way, but were all the time you were enjoying what they were doing, listening to their music or whatever, they were inflicting horrible things on other people. So ultimately, how do you forgive that? Or should you? I think that is the powerful meditation that we can take away from these situations, because that's what all of these victims, all of these people are grappling with. And on a bigger level, or another level, or a level more removed, all of us have to figure out, we don't have to, but it will be a helpful thing to do, how to, or should we, forgive the monster. What do we do? Well, a lot of the initial reaction is to just send the person away. So in the case of R. Kelly, he's lost his record contracts and record deals. Spotify and other music stations, music streaming services won't play his music. That may play out with Michael Jackson too, but his music's been around longer, people know it more. And that's an understandable reaction. Don't continue to support these people when they do things that you find horrifying, when they commit crimes like that. So that's understandable. Some people have said, well, in the case of Michael Jackson, his music has already made a lot of money. And how can you can't really take that out of sort of the fabric of our society in the way that you can with R. Kelly. Well, it's not easy to do with R. Kelly's music either, because R. Kelly's music has been around for a while. But ultimately, no matter how important we think an artist is, over time, eventually, their influence, their impact fades away. Doesn't matter who. People will refer to them as touchstones, but as art continues to mature and flourish and evolve, those early folks, as influential as they may have been, they begin to fade away. So don't worry about that. And you can, and I hear that some radio stations already are refusing to play Michael Jackson songs. In a personal way, I would say that's I would say that's a good step to take, and the reason is not because of Michael Jackson. For me, putting some kind of ban on Michael's music, to stop supporting or playing it or having any kind of monetary interaction as a result of it, is a good idea, because it's the Jackson family that benefits from that. And the Jackson family's attitude, their approach to all of this has been horrendous. They enabled Michael when he was alive to do these things, and there's quite a bit to suggest that they knew at least some of what was going on. They have continued to blame these victims who do have the courage to come forward, and scandalously try to, destroy their credibility destroy them. They've had a machine that has been working to do this for decades, and has been successful at doing it for decades. The fact that it's still coming as a revelation, even though Michael Jackson has had trials, he's had very highly publicized arrests. He famously, settled with someone who accused him of crimes, and then he went to trial, and he was let go again because enough doubt was cast. And there were victims that didn't want to testify. So ultimately, enough doubt was cast that a jury, whose job is to, look for reasonable doubt. If you can't find reasonable doubt, then you would convict. But if there's reasonable doubt, you're not supposed to. That's how the law works. So these monsters, if you will, were able to continue doing what they did for the longest time. And now, it seems like now is a time of reckoning. I've spoken before on this show about how we reach a tipping point with certain things. And it all has to do with, really, our consciousness, our awareness. When we reach a point where people are truly aware, then things happen fast. I talk about some of the things that have happened in the past few years. I talked about this in relationship to gay marriage, which was for years and years and years and years, no one could talk about that. And then, really, in a matter of a few months, maybe a year or so, the entire thing changed because people's perspective on it changed. Things like the acceptance of marijuana as a legal and healthful drug. I mean, that was fought for years, and finally, you reach a tipping point in awareness, and everything changes. And that's what seems to be happening here. Years and years and years, these things have been going on where famous people were able to get away with such horrible behavior. And now perhaps it's not going to be quite so easy. We'll see what happens. I suspect that with the R. Kelly situation, he may get out of this. I mean, he may walk away. There are people willing to testify, but again, if you're able to successfully attack their credibility and so on and so forth, if they change their story or they get scared, all of these things can happen. So that might happen. So if you're looking for justice there, that may or may not happen. What I understand, Mr. Kelly has lost a lot of money and may not be able to afford the best attorneys. So that might be something, unlike Michael Jackson, who had, even though he was losing money at the time too, he certainly had the benefit of very expensive and fancy attorneys to help him. So I think we have to be able to find a way to deal with this. And that's a meditation. I'm not offering any real answers here, just focusing a light on what we'll need to do, which is forgiving the monster. Because we have to find a way to get there. And for those victims,